In the 5th year of secretly loving Jabari, he fell in love with a girl. For her sake, he left me behind time and time again. At the very moment of the car accident, he bypassed me and rushed to save her. In that car accident, my right ear's hearing was impaired. Later, I got married, and the groom was the person introduced by him. He cried until his eyes were red and begged me, "I never thought you two would really be together, Bonnie. Don't abandon me." I pried his fingers off one by one and said to him with a smile, "Jabari, don't be so cheap." On the Chishi festival, Jabari suddenly said he had a surprise for me. He must be going to confess his love to you by choosing this festival. Bonnie, good days are waiting for you ahead. My best friend, who knew that I had secretly loved Jabari for 5 years, was so excited that her eyes narrowed into slits when she smiled. The couple I've been shipping is going to come true. Chishi festival, surprise? These words made expectations rise in my heart. My friend's certainty made my heart beat even faster. Following the location given by Jabari, I dressed up carefully before going out. The front hall of the club was arranged in an elegant and atmospheric way with a strong sense of ambience. The ground was covered with rose petals, and the walls were wrapped with inflated balloons. My fingertips trembled uncontrollably as I walked step by step towards the big words, "I like you," in the middle of the wall. I was imagining the expression I might have when Jabari confessed his love. Suddenly, a hand stretched out from a door beside me, pulled me in, and before I could react, pushed me forward again, pushing me into the arms of another boy. "Bonnie, let me introduce a boyfriend to you." Then he smiled at the boy and said, "Leo, catch her." The boy named Leo obviously hadn't reacted yet. Subconsciously, he supported my waist to help me stand firm and then let go. He was a gentleman and had a good sense of propriety. "Jabari, what's going on?" Leo's deep voice rang in my ear with a bit of anger in his tone. Jabari suddenly smiled ambiguously. "Today is the Chishi festival. I'm entrusting my sister to you." Watching this farce, even though I was a bit slow, I finally realized that I wasn't the main character today. I was just like trash that could be thrown away at will, being pushed around by him. My heart, which had been hanging in the air, suddenly fell to the bottom of the cliff. I asked in a hoarse voice, "Jabari, what on earth are you doing?" Jabari took a deep breath and stared unblinkingly at the crack of the door. His slightly rapid breathing showed his nervousness. There was an unusual look in his eyes. "Bonnie, I'm going to confess my love." He didn't even spare me a glance. At this time, the sound of high heels stepping on the ground came from outside the door. Jabari's eyes were filled with joy and determination. He pushed the door open, held the flowers in his hands, and walked towards the girl step by step. I was pushed by others and was forced to witness Jabari's confession together. "Scarlett, I like you. Will you be with me?" The girl was as gentle and lovely as her name suggested. Surprise flashed across her face, and then she seemed to understand something. She took the bouquet of flowers and suddenly her gaze stopped on me. "Jabari, I'm a very jealous person. If you want to be my boyfriend, there can't be other members of the opposite sex around you." She held her head high, and the expression she looked at me with was clearly hostile. "She's just my sister." He then pointed at Leo standing behind me and said with a low laugh, "And that's the boyfriend she's about to develop a relationship with." Scarlett obviously breathed a sigh of relief and threw herself into Jabari's arms. There were shouts of encouragement all around. Looking at this scene, I suddenly felt a bit numb. The so-called surprise was to stuff a boyfriend to me so that his girlfriend could be with him without any doubts. I don't know who said quietly in the corner, "Childhood sweethearts can't compete with the one who suddenly appears in life after all." After bringing Scarlett into the private room, the atmosphere became even more lively. Jabari had arranged for some accomplices in advance and proposed to play truth or dare. The empty wine bottle almost always pointed in their direction. The game got more and more outrageous. In less than a moment, Jabari and Scarlett had already started sharing a biscuit. The length of the biscuit became shorter and shorter. Finally, it disappeared between their two lips. They kissed passionately. Suddenly, I couldn't sit still and wanted to go out to get some fresh air. Someone patted me on the shoulder and asked close to my ear, "Do you want to go out?" I raised my eyes and was a bit surprised. Leo was different from Jabari. All night long, he seemed lazy and casual, like an outsider, not interested in everything that happened. Once when the bottle mouth pointed at him and others urged him to choose the dare option to Princess Carry Me, he just chose to drink as a punishment. I thought he wasn't interested in me. Seeing that I was stunned, he repeated, "Are you coming or not? Or do you want to stay and watch this meaningless reality show all night?" He called Jabari's confession a meaningless reality show. He was a bit sharp-tongued, but his words hit the nail on the head. I stretched out my hand and was pulled up by him. "What are we going to do? Sober up?" I didn't expect that Leo's way to sober up was to climb a mountain. I didn't have much physical strength. Halfway up the mountain, I was out of breath and even slipped when I stepped on a stone. I really couldn't climb anymore. I sat on a stone on the mountainside shamelessly and said, "I can't climb anymore. I can't get up." Only after saying that did I realize that I was acting coquettish towards a boy I had just met. This wasn't my usual style. The boy one step away from me sighed, turned his head, stretched out his hand, raised his eyebrows with a bit of a rascal look. "I only have 200 yuan on me. Am I qualified to help you up?" The wind in the mountain blew up the broken hair on his forehead, revealing an astonishingly handsome face. He was good-looking and sunny. I followed his words and replied, unexpectedly, "I met a pauper. I'm afraid I won't make any money today." Leo stared at me for a while. "All right, I've met a swindler." Then he resignedly squatted down and patted his shoulder again. "Come on, princess. I'll carry you on my back. I'll put the rest of the extortion money on credit." Looking at his broad back, I asked without thinking, "Didn't you refuse to carry me just now? Was there any difference between a princess carry and carrying someone on the back?" He didn't answer immediately. He carried me on his back and walked steadily up the mountain step by step. Then he said seriously, "In the private room, they only asked me if I wanted to carry you, but didn't give you a choice. But here, you don't have to think about anything else. If you don't like it, you don't have to do it." Hearing these words, I was stunned. I had known him for less than 24 hours, but his words hit me right on the mark. He knew what I cared about the most. No one had ever said such things to me before. Even when I was at Jabari's house, I used to hide my preferences habitually and tried carefully to please them. As time passed, I even forgot my own wishes. But now someone told me that if I didn't like it, I didn't have to do it. Finally, we reached the top of the mountain. It was still very dark. Leo said slowly in the pitch darkness, "Go to sleep. I'll wake you up after the sunrise." When I was with him, I seemed to have no pressure. Unconsciously, I fell asleep. When I was in a daze, he pushed me. "Wake up." I narrowed my eyes, leaving only a thin slit, but was amazed by the scenery in front of me. A ray of sunlight pierced through the gap of the darkness. The dazzling light explored the originally chaotic world like tentacles. At the moment I saw it, my mood suddenly improved. When I got home and checked my phone, I found that Jabari had called me more than 20 times without my knowing. I ignored it and saw Leo's update. "Look up. Romance is on display." There were 2 photos. One was of the sunrise, and the other was of me. Just looking at the photos and the caption, I could almost imagine his playful face in my mind. I was just about to leave a comment when Jabari's voice startled me. "Do you know how many times I've called you? Why didn't you answer?" He supported himself against the wall with both hands, as if he was trapping me in his arms. He used an interrogative tone that I had never heard before. "Did you go to watch the sunrise with Leo?" I guessed that he should have also seen Leo's update. I just hummed in response and was about to leave, but he pulled me back again and stared at me fixedly. "How far have you two developed? Did he kiss you? You just met him less than a day ago and spent the night with him?" His hand was gripping tightly, and his eyes were gloomy. "Bonnie, are you too casual?" This sour tone and expression of his were the first time I had seen. I felt strange but didn't want to think about it carefully. I raised my head to look at him. There was no way to retreat in the cramped space. Jabari, you're the one who introduced the boyfriend to me. Since we're boyfriend and girlfriend, what does it have to do with you what we do? Jabari suddenly froze, and a blank expression flashed across his face. His attitude suddenly softened, and he coaxed me. Bonnie, I'm wrong. If you don't like Leo, you don't have to force yourself. I'll go and talk to him. After all, whether Bonnie likes it or not is the most important thing. If he had thought like this from the beginning, he wouldn't have pushed me to others without asking for my wishes. And then appeared as a good guy afterwards. What was this? Was it like giving a slap and then a sweet date? Jabari seemed very certain that I wouldn't like Leo. There was a usual sense of certainty in his calm eyes. I moved aside a little to distance myself from him. No need. A moment of panic flashed across his face. What do you mean? Do you really have a thing for him? At this time, a voice came from the corner of the stairs. Jabari, do you have any disposable toothbrushes and towels at your place? Hearing the voice, Jabari subconsciously let go of my hand and took 2 steps back. In front of me, Scarlett, wearing my pajamas, walked closer with a smile on her face, looking exactly like a mistress. I went to watch the sunrise with Leo, and he said I was casual. But he brought his girlfriend home to spend the night on the day of his confession. Wasn't he a stud? I pulled the corners of my mouth and showed a sarcastic expression. Jabari subconsciously explained. Bonnie, I didn't have anything with her. Suddenly, I found it really funny and couldn't help laughing out loud. Jabari, you don't need to explain it to me. I wasn't interested in what he and Scarlett did. Jabari's expression was a bit dazed, as if he didn't even know what he was doing. After a while, he finally came to his senses and kissed Scarlett on the face soothingly, with an affectionate tone. I'll go get them for you. The 3 of them finished breakfast in silence. Scarlett said she was leaving. Isn't Bonnie going back to school today too? Why don't we go together? Jabari also pretended that nothing had happened and said with a smile, let's go together. The driver isn't here today. You'll have to take a taxi later. After what had just happened, I didn't want to have any more contact with them. But this was a villa area, and it wasn't very convenient to take a taxi. I had no choice but to agree. Scarlett didn't have much to say to me. She kept pestering Jabari all the way, talking about the silly things Jabari did when he was chasing her. From time to time, she asked me in a showy tone, wasn't Jabari so silly? Bonnie, do you think I matched Jabari? I closed my eyes and let her voice reverberate in the enclosed compartment. Occasionally, I would respond with an. Seeing that I didn't react much, she stopped talking to me. Instead, Jabari's face looked a bit gloomy. Suddenly, Scarlett's voice became particularly sharp. Jabari, why are you still wearing this watch? Do you think the one I gave you isn't good enough? Hearing this, I opened my eyes and my gaze shifted to Jabari's wrist. On his wrist, he was still wearing the quartz watch I gave him. I bought it with the money I earned from working during 2 summer vacations. It wasn't worth much to him, but he had been wearing it all the time. He told me that he liked this watch very much and that the heart put into it was more important than the money. However, upon hearing Scarlett's words, he flusteredly pulled down his cuff to cover the watch. I'll change it when we get back to school. But Scarlett wouldn't let it go and stared fixedly at the watch. I've told you several times, but you still haven't changed it. Why do you care so much about this watch? Jabari, do you like the person who gave you the watch? Hearing this, I sneered in my heart. Like? How could that be possible? But a blank look flashed across Jabari's face, and he murmured, like? It seemed that he hadn't even realized the confusion on his own face. Just at this moment, a truck suddenly came driving towards us from the front. The horn was blaring sharply. Jabari reacted and gripped the steering wheel tightly to avoid it, but the road wasn't wide enough, and the car crashed into the guardrail on one side. A flash of white light passed before my eyes. With great effort, I opened my eyes and wanted to call for help, but I saw Jabari was struggling to pull Scarlett out of the passenger seat. Scarlett cried and threw herself into his arms. And my right ear kept making a buzzing sound, and finally, it seemed to lose its sense of feeling. At this moment, I suddenly remembered the scene when Jabari first brought me to their home. My parents had a car accident, and all my relatives avoided me like the plague because I was a burden. I didn't say a word all the time. It was Jabari. He took the trouble to share his school life, his friends with me every day, and put all the things he thought were fun in front of me. He told me solemnly, "Bonnie, this will be your home from now on. If anyone bullies you, I'll help you get back at them." However, he was the one who abandoned me without hesitation. The 5-year secret crush disappeared completely in this car accident. When I woke up again, my nostrils were filled with the smell of disinfectant. My right ear was wrapped up, feeling a bit numb and swollen. The first person I saw was Leo. When he saw me, there was a bit of surprise, guilt, and sadness on his face. Finally, only a reassuring smile remained. "If you didn't wake up, I'd be old." He looked a bit haggard, but he was still clean and handsome. He helped me sit up and handed me a piece of sliced apple. He carefully looked me up and down. "You had a minor operation. It's not a big deal. It's just that your hearing is a bit impaired. It's a bit troublesome, and you'll have to go to the hospital a few more times." Then he raised his chin a bit arrogantly. "Fortunately, I'm quite free too." There seemed to be a kind of power in him, and what he said made people subconsciously believe it. It seemed that as long as he said it was okay, it would be okay. I wanted to say something, but my mouth was blocked by the apple. At this time, a figure suddenly rushed in, tightly grasped my hand, looking anxious and surprised. "Bonnie, you're awake." I had only been in a coma for a day, but Jabari looked as if he hadn't slept for several days. His face was full of stubble, and his hair hung down on his forehead, looking particularly disheveled. People who didn't know would think that he was the one who had the operation. He had always been mature and steady. It was the first time I saw him like this. I pulled my hand back. At the first moment of the car accident, it was understandable that he chose his girlfriend. But I couldn't let it go either. At that moment, I had already decided that I wouldn't like him anymore. Seeing that I pulled my hand back, Jabari's hand froze in the air, and a flash of pain appeared in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Bonnie. I thought I would be very sad." But at this moment, I was especially calm. In the past, Jabari had brought me out of the darkness and told me that I wasn't alone. Over the years, my gratitude to him was actually more than my feelings for him. It was just that I had blurred the boundary between the two. Subconsciously, I had pinned my last bit of tenderness for life on him. I swallowed the chewed apple. "Jabari, you didn't do anything wrong." Jabari's voice suddenly trembled a bit, and he opened his eyes wide in disbelief. "Bonnie, don't talk to me like this. You should blame me. It's me who didn't take good care of you." I interrupted him. "You didn't do anything wrong. Choosing your girlfriend was right, but I don't want to see you anymore now." He subconsciously wanted to refute, but then he saw me covering my ear. His hand that had been frozen in the air was withdrawn. Seeing him made my ear seem to start hurting again. "Please go out. I want to be alone." Jabari hesitated to speak, but finally said to Leo beside him, "Take good care of her. I'll leave first." Leo didn't respond. He raised his eyebrows, pressed his tongue against the roof of his mouth, and said in a carefree manner, "I'll see you out." Half an hour later, Leo came back with a bit of bruise on his face, but he was smiling. "Here, didn't you say you wanted to eat roasted sweet potatoes? I brought some back for you. It was when we were watching the sunrise. It was a bit cold, and I just murmured that it would be nice if there were roasted sweet potatoes to eat." I didn't expect that he had remembered it until now. I looked at his face and teased him. "So, were you beaten up by the uncle who sells roasted sweet potatoes?" Leo raised his chin, showing a bit of bruise on his chin, but it didn't affect his good looks. Instead, it made him look fierce yet cute. "Yeah, I didn't bring any money with me, and the uncle who sells sweet potatoes chased me all the way. He lifted the sweet potatoes with my hand, signaling me to eat quickly. Hurry up and eat. If he catches up later, we'll be caught red-handed. If you eat them now, you can destroy the evidence." I burst out laughing. He was a young master. How could he eat without paying? 80% of the time, he had a fight with Jabari. Thank you, Leo. Leo rubbed my hair. Why are you hesitating? If someone makes you unhappy, take revenge. Make others unhappy instead of making yourself unhappy. The strong smell of sweet potatoes wafted over, warm and sweet. My heart also felt warm along with it. From that day on, Leo had been staying by my side until I was discharged from the hospital. The moment I got home, the first thing I did was to pack my clothes. I wanted to move out. While I was packing, the door suddenly opened. It was Jabari. When he saw me, a hint of joy flashed in his eyes. There were still red marks and bruises on his face, even more than Leo's. I suddenly felt a bit proud. Leo had won. I was as happy as if I had won a battle myself. Bonnie, you're back? Why didn't you call me to pick you up? Jabari rushed to me eagerly, but when he saw me packing my clothes, the joy in his eyes disappeared completely. Where are you going? His eyes were full of panic and fear. He quickly pressed my hand that was packing the clothes. His movements were stubborn and firm. This is your home, Bonnie. You're not allowed to leave. He took out the clothes I had put in the suitcase one by one. After putting the clothes back into the cabinet, he firmly closed the cabinet door. Seeing the clothes neatly placed in the cabinet, he seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. I watched all this and suddenly felt a bit tired. Jabari, you're making my efforts in vain. I didn't mean that. He suddenly looked very aggrieved. I know you're angry with me. I just don't want you to leave. I knew he hadn't done anything wrong, but it still made me uncomfortable. I couldn't stay under the same roof with him anymore. Jabari, you have no right to stop me. I pulled the luggage in front of me and took the clothes out of the cabinet again and again. Actually, I didn't have many clothes. Living in Jabari's home, I still couldn't feel at ease as if I were in my own home. I always thought that if I was abandoned again one day, I could take all my things away at once. I really didn't have a sense of security, and I really had been abandoned. He didn't stop me anymore. He just stiffly watched me put the clothes into the suitcase one by one. The light shone in from the window. His tall and slender shadow fell on the wooden floor, making him look desolate and lonely. When I zipped up the suitcase, he suddenly asked me softly, as if grasping at the last straw. Don't you like me anymore? What? I looked up at him in disbelief. Seeing his expression, I knew I hadn't misheard. I had always thought that he didn't know I liked him, but it turned out that he knew. So, he had been pretending not to know all these years. Then what was on his mind when he introduced boyfriends to me? I suddenly laughed a cold laugh. Jabari, you really make me feel that my liking for you in these years was blind. I grasped the handle of the suitcase and was about to leave. Jabari followed me and tightly grasped the handle of the suitcase behind me. Bonnie, before he could finish his words, he was interrupted by a casual voice. Baby, you're so slow. Leo put his hands on the railing of the stairs behind him. He was wearing a black woolen coat. As the breeze blew, a few strands of hair were lifted. He walked over casually and casually took the suitcase away. Not to mention Jabari, even I was startled by the word, baby. Jabari stared at me even more intently. Have you two developed to this extent? His fists were clenched tightly and the veins on his hands bulged, as if he was going to rush up and fight in the next second. After thinking for a while, he suddenly thought of something, breathed a sigh of relief, and looked a bit smug. Leo, Bonnie liked me before. Did you know that? After so many years, how could she stop liking me just like that? He said it very firmly. Are you two deliberately taking revenge on me? Hearing him say that, I felt as uncomfortable as if I had swallowed a fly. Leo also stopped in his steps and said with a bit of disdain, you said it was before. Taking a girl's liking for you is something to show off. As a man, I'm ashamed for you. Compared to the previous 5 years, I value the next 50 years more. As for revenge? Leo paused. You're not worthy of it. After saying that, he sincerely curled the corners of his mouth and sneered sarcastically. By the way, I haven't thanked you yet. Thank you for introducing Bonnie to me. I really like her. Jabari was left speechless. When I went downstairs, I was a bit startled when I saw Leo's car. The logo of Porsche was particularly eye-catching. Was this the beat-up second-hand car he told me about? He told me rather pitifully that he would pick me up in a beat-up second-hand car and asked me not to dislike it. I even subconsciously comforted him. But who in their right mind would call a Porsche a beat-up second-hand car? What you just said? Before I could finish my sentence, Leo suddenly signaled me to look at the rearview mirror. Unexpectedly, Jabari had chased after us. He stared at the car and walked forward step by step. Do you want to irritate him? His eyes were bewitching and I was like being under a spell. I subconsciously nodded. Leo suddenly smiled a rather mischievous smile. He reached out his hand and stroked my lips and something seemed about to explode at any moment. I've always wanted to know what it tastes like. Following these words, his warm lips landed on mine. All my questions were blocked back by his kiss. The car window was knocked on, and outside the window was Jabari's expression that looked like he wanted to kill someone. Leo didn't roll down the window. He withdrew to his own position and gently reminded me, "Fasten your seatbelt." Before I could react, he had already started the engine. Jabari was immediately left behind the rear of the car and disappeared from sight. When I returned to school, I learned that Jabari and Scarlett had broken up. Just like their confession before, their breakup also caused a big stir. I wasn't interested in this matter, but the more I didn't want to hear about it, the more things related to them would appear in front of me. At the corner of the stairs, Scarlett asked Jabari with red eyes, "Do you really want to break up with me? Why? What did I do wrong?" She lifted up her trouser leg, looking rather aggrieved. "I'm also injured. Do you see this scar on my leg? I won't be able to wear shorts or short skirts in the future." "But Jabari, you didn't even ask me about it. I went to the hospital to deal with the wound by myself, while you just stayed outside Bonnie's ward every day. Who is your girlfriend after all?" On her leg, a hideous scar stretched from her thigh to her calf. It was clear and terrifying. Unlike Scarlett's almost broken down emotions, Jabari's voice was cold. "I don't like you anymore." Hearing this sentence, Scarlett threw herself into his arms, grabbed his waist tightly, and tears streamed down her face in a rush. She was extremely flustered. "Jabari, I'm wrong. I was too headstrong. Please don't abandon me." Without the initial love, there was only impatience in Jabari's eyes. He pulled Scarlett out forcefully. "Stop pestering me." Scarlett suddenly became a bit crazy. With red eyes, tears flowed down her face. "Jabari, what did you say when you were chasing me? You said you would be nice to me. You said you would spoil me no matter how headstrong I was. But what happened? We haven't been together for long and you don't want me anymore?" She took a step forward, grabbed Jabari's hand, and before he could react, quickly lifted up his cuff. When she saw the watch on his wrist, she was stunned and then reached out to grab it. "I knew it. This was given by Bonnie, right? Don't think I don't know. Do you like Bonnie? So you tossed and turned and couldn't sleep in the middle of the night, and called her again and again. You even wore this broken watch like it was a treasure on your hand." A trance flashed across Jabari's face, but then he became determined. "Yes, I like her." He grabbed Scarlett's nape with one hand and pulled her back a step. "Don't bother me anymore." Scarlett suddenly laughed while crying. "Jabari, you're just so cheap. You just like the people you can't have. People like you are doomed to never find happiness." Jabari remained silent and let her say whatever she wanted. I wasn't interested in their quarrel, but I was forced to listen to the whole process. After Scarlett left sobbing, when there was no sound around anymore, I started to go downstairs. Unexpectedly, Jabari hadn't left yet. After walking a few steps, I was pulled in front of him by a strong force. My hands were pinned down by him, and he pushed me against the wall. Then a kiss fell with brute force and an indescribable resentment. He almost used all his strength, and I couldn't break free, so I had to bite him with my mouth. The pain lingered on my lips and teeth, and Jabari had to let me go. There was a conspicuous bite mark on his lip, with blood smudged, making him look dangerous and fierce. "Bonnie, you heard everything, didn't you?" He clenched his fists, his tone unfriendly. "How could you kiss Leo? Did his kiss make you feel better than mine? He pinched my chin and questioned me. How could you stop liking me just because you said so? He seemed so confident, but on what grounds did he ask me that? How lowly must I be in his eyes for him to think that even though he had a girlfriend, I should still continue to like him? I raised my foot and hit him with my forehead, forcing him to take a step back. My hands were also freed. I slapped him. Jabari, you don't like me, but you still want me to continue liking you. What does it have to do with you what I do with others? What right do you have to control me? He laughed, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Instead, he was shrouded in gloom. I saw you kissing him, and I went crazy with jealousy. You clearly like me. He stretched out his thumb and wiped his lower lip and then approached me again. You just heard it too. I like you. He looked at me quietly with hope in his eyes. Let's start over. Without Scarlett, without Leo, okay? I was so angry that I laughed. I really wanted to dig into his brain to see what was inside. Jabari, are you crazy? Why do you think I should revolve around you? He frowned and suddenly squatted down. He asked me in a hoarse voice, is there really no chance? He looked so lonely and his back bent down inch by inch. He didn't seem to be the same person as the always high-spirited Jabari. After several re-examinations, my ear basically recovered. When I went to the hospital for the last re-examination, the doctor said with a smile, you don't need to come again next time. Just pay more attention in daily life. Then he pointed at Leo and teased. Is this your boyfriend? He accompanies you every time. You two have such a good relationship. I was just about to refute when Leo said before I did, yes, yes, yes. What the doctor said is right. I didn't know which sentence he was responding to. We were silent all the way. When we arrived downstairs at my home, he parked the car and came over to me pitifully. When will you give me a proper title? We've already kissed. Even the doctor couldn't stand it anymore. I suddenly became very nervous, but my mind seemed to explode like fireworks blooming brightly. You already have a title. He raised the corners of his mouth happily. What title? I unfastened my seat belt, got out of the car and said to the person inside the car window, goodbye, boyfriend. He smiled really happily. I was also in a good mood, humming a song all the way and my heart was pounding like a deer in my chest. Just as I was about to enter the community, a car suddenly stopped in front of me, parked in a mess. Before the car had come to a complete stop, a person got out of it. He dragged me towards his car. If it weren't for this face that I had secretly loved for 5 years, I would really have thought that I had encountered a kidnapper. Jabari, what are you doing? He pushed me into the passenger seat, then went around to the right side to fasten my seat belt for me. Walked around the front of the car and got in. I was about to open the door when he suddenly turned to look at me with a gloomy face. It's a good thing you didn't let him come up just now. Otherwise, I really don't know what I would have done. He looked terribly gloomy. It was as if he would peel me alive in the next second. Be good, okay? He locked the car door and I couldn't open it. I turned my face away, not wanting to see him. Considering my relationship with him, it would be good enough if I didn't stab him in the heart. How could I be good? I remained silent and didn't answer. Seeing me like this, Jabari flatteringly stroked the tips of my hair. I wanted to dodge. The depressing atmosphere in the room made her feel very uncomfortable. He suddenly smiled and said, Bonnie, I have a surprise for you. Then he started the engine. This was his newly bought car. It was the first time I had ridden in it, but I still had a shadow from the previous car accident. I was as pale as a sheet as he drove me to a high-end club. He got out of the car and took me out. The ground was covered with rose petals. Starting from the entrance, it was arranged even more grandly than when he confessed to Scarlett before. Everyone passing by was whispering enviously about me. I sneered in my heart. I already knew what he was going to do. If it were in the past, I would really have thought this was a surprise, but now I thought it was a joke. I had woken up from this dream, but Jabari hadn't. It was still those friends who rushed out together. Get together. Get together. They were like the atmosphere group. No matter who came, they would cheer and shout. Jabari looked at me eagerly and handed me a bouquet of roses. Bonnie, what I owe you, I will make up for it. I threw the flowers directly on the ground. Jabari's face turned ugly, but he still endured it. Bonnie, isn't this what you want? I'm already making up for it. What else do you want? I was so angry that I laughed. What I want? Everything in front of me made me feel sick. The decoration, the scene, and the person in front of me. Do you know what I want? I want you to leave. The venue was as silent as a graveyard. Everyone's applause stopped suddenly. Obviously, they all realized that this was a failed confession. Jabari's lips were tightly pursed, and there were faint veins bulging on his forehead. He suddenly softened and took me into his arms. Bonnie, I know what you care about. I've always liked you. I just didn't want to ruin the relationship between us. I was afraid that we couldn't even be friends. I stomped on his foot hard. When he winced in pain, I pushed him away and laughed coldly. When you introduced boyfriends to me and when you abandoned me during the car accident, why didn't I feel that you liked me at all? You said you were afraid that we couldn't be friends. Well, what about now? Do you think there's any connection between us and the word friends at all? Jabari's lips moved up and down as if he wanted to explain something, but I interrupted him again. Jabari, Scarlett was right. You just like the people you can't have. Over the years, if he had told me that he liked me even just once, I would have rushed towards him like a moth to a flame. No. You're different from her. I really like you. As he was speaking, he suddenly opened his eyes wide and looked straight behind me. I also turned around to look, but I saw Scarlett holding a knife in her hand which reflected an unusual light under the light. She was running towards me. I realized that her knife was aimed at me. Scarlett's eyes were wide open with anger and there was no rationality on her face. She stared at me fixedly. Bonnie, go to hell. The accident happened so suddenly that no one could react in time. Jabari subconsciously threw himself in front of me and took the knife from me. The bright red blood kept flowing out of his body. Seeing all this, Scarlett suddenly collapsed on the ground in fright and murmured, I didn't mean it. You forced me to do it. She was subdued by others on the ground. When the ambulance and the police arrived, I was still tightly held by Jabari and the blood stained my white dress red. His voice was intermittent but he kept repeating, Bonnie, give me a hug. I'm so cold. Jabari was pushed into the operating room and I was a bit dazed at the door. Over the years, he had really been nice to me. But later, we became even worse than strangers. I didn't know where the problem was. I fell into a trance, until the operating light went off and the doctor came out. The operation was very successful. I breathed a sigh of relief. Jabari woke up but he didn't seem to remember me. He stared at me with a confused look in his eyes. Are you my girlfriend? I went to ask the doctor. The doctor said that it might be due to the shock and it was normal that he couldn't remember for the time being. I didn't answer his question. But he was very stubborn and kept asking repeatedly. I think you look familiar. You're my girlfriend, right? I shook my head, took a step back, and said in a cold voice. We don't know each other. I just happened to save you. Really? The light in his eyes dimmed little by little and then, as if grasping at the last straw, he kept staring at me. Do we really not know each other? It's best that he didn't remember me. I neither loved him nor hated him. But we could only be strangers to each other. No, we don't. I put his mobile phone on the table. You can check who your friends are and ask them to come and accompany you. This should be the last time I come here. I deleted all the information about me in his mobile phone. Even when I walked out of the hospital, I could still feel the gaze that was still fixed on my back, following me like a shadow. After that, at school, I could occasionally see Jabari. But when he stared at me, I would look away first. Everyone seemed to have tacitly accepted that we were strangers and stopped mentioning anything about Jabari to me. After that, it seemed that I met him less and less often. Leo and I chose to get married right after graduation. When he put the engagement ring on my finger, he breathed a sigh of relief. The only thing I'm worried about now is someone coming to disrupt the wedding. I laughed at him for being overly worried, but I didn't expect that I would see Jabari again at the wedding venue. I was a bit surprised because I hadn't invited him at all. Different from the image I was familiar with, his eyes were bloodshot, his suit was full of wrinkles, and he still smelled of alcohol from a hangover. This little episode wouldn't affect the progress of the wedding. However, I didn't expect that he would rush straight to the middle of the auditorium, tightly grab my hand, and plead in a begging tone. "Bonnie," I remembered. "I love you. Don't leave me." There was an uproar among the guests and everyone started talking. "What's going on?" "Folks, live broadcast of the scene of snatching a wife. It's going to be trending on the hot search for sure." Leo pulled me behind him. "Jabari, are you crazy?" Jabari was out of his mind and shouted at Leo, "Give her back to me. I really can't live without her." His eyes were red and suddenly he started crying. "Bonnie, you lied to me. You said we were strangers. You asked everyone to lie to me. But you're going to marry someone else." The security guards maintaining order saw him like this and didn't dare to step forward for a moment. "I can't accept that you're marrying another man. I'm so jealous that I'm going crazy. It should have been us standing on this stage today." His voice was trembling and he spoke more and more eagerly, looking at me with hopeful and pleading eyes. "Bonnie, could you please give me another chance? I know I was wrong. Let's start over. We can also be very happy." I walked up to him. He thought that my attitude had softened and tightly grasped my hand. "Jabari." I pried his fingers off one by one, watching the light in his eyes turn gray little by little. "Don't be so cheap. We're doomed to be strangers." I signaled the security guards to pull him away. The wedding went on as usual. When Leo hugged me and kissed me, he whispered, "Fortunately, you didn't run away with him. Otherwise, I would be the one to disrupt your next wedding." I kissed him hard to shut him up. My fiancé is the extremely dissolute young master of the Beijing social circle. He has had countless relationships with women, but he alone disdains to touch me. He's disgusted by her black-rimmed glasses that are even bigger than her face. "Don't make me sick." I smiled knowingly. For 4 years, I've had to pretend to be madly in love with him every day. I'm so tired. Now I can finally get rid of him. However, Eduardo climbed to the top of the 88-story building with red eyes, begging me not to abandon him. When I arrived at the private box, I happened to hear a delicate female voice, "I'm sitting on my brother's lap. Will my brother's fiancé be angry?" My right hand was still on the doorknob when I unexpectedly met Eduardo's eyes. A girl wearing super short hot pants was straddling his lap and the two of them were close together. Eduardo was leaning leisurely on the sofa, looking past the girl's smooth shoulders at me. Seeing me, he didn't show the slightest bit of panic. Instead, he curved his lips into a smile, his eyes full of mockery. "Hey, fiancé, are you angry?" Everyone in the private box stopped what they were doing and stared at me intently. I knew that they all wanted to see how I, the unfavored legitimate wife, would react. The hot girl also turned her head, but her two soft white arms wrapped around Eduardo's neck even tighter. There was blatant provocation and disdain. I took a deep breath and walked forward. "Get down." My tone was cold and brooked no argument. The atmosphere in the private box immediately became tense. Someone turned off the music, and suddenly it was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. Eduardo's underling even swallowed hard. "Big sister-in-law?" Only then did the girl show the panic of being caught in the act and said in an aggrieved voice, "Eduardo." Eduardo seemed surprised that I was so tough tonight. He frowned slightly and raised his eyebrows slightly. I clenched my fists. When I spoke again, my voice had lost all its previous force. "Well, he's had an injury on his leg. Don't hurt him by putting pressure on it." After explaining timidly, I carefully adjusted my glasses frame to hide my nervousness at the moment. "Ha ha 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 ha." Suddenly, deafening laughter erupted in the private box. I thought sister-in-law had been possessed by someone else tonight. But it turns out it's still the same lovesick formula as before. "Eduardo, teach us how to manage our wives. How can you make your fiancé lick your boots for 4 years without complaint?" Is Eduardo especially good in that aspect? Eduardo sneered. Her? She doesn't deserve it. Those black-rimmed glasses of hers are even bigger than her face. Don't disgust me, I don't know why my mom chose her. Everyone laughed even more wildly. The girl in hot pants didn't get off Eduardo's lap. Instead, she sat up even higher. At this moment, she was laughing so hard that her whole body was shaking, and her actions became even more unrestrained. I stood there awkwardly, my nails digging painfully into my palms. Eduardo leaned back and watched me being made fun of casually. Eduardo, it's almost 11 o'clock, I dutifully reminded him. 11 o'clock was the curfew time set by Eduardo's mother for him. No matter how much Eduardo fooled around, he wouldn't dare to defy his mother, who had extremely strong control. His face darkened, and he cursed, "What a killjoy!" He patted the girl's face with his hand, as perfunctorily as if he were patting a dog. "Get down. I'll look for you next time, little sister." The girl refused and clung even tighter, her little mouth sweet and clingy. "I don't want my brother to leave." Eduardo's patience lasted only 3 seconds and was now exhausted. He pushed the girl away roughly. "I've already said next time. Don't be shameless." The girl, who fell to the ground, looked incredulous. How could the man who was so affectionate just a moment ago turn his back on her so quickly? She pursed her lips and was about to cry. Eduardo didn't even look at her and walked out. This man had always been heartless. I shook my head and quickly followed. Eduardo had drunk a lot tonight, and his mood sank as soon as he got in the car. He lay on my lap, closed his eyes, and his long eyelashes fluttered. I carefully stroked his black hair and gently patted his back. For 4 years, every time he was in a bad mood, I comforted him like this. The movements were familiar and natural. "Summer, could you please not wear plaid shirts next time? They're so tacky," he suddenly said. My raised hand almost slapped his handsome face. Black-rimmed glasses are tacky, plaid shirts are tacky, jeans are tacky. Then don't lie on me. Forget it. Don't get angry with a depressed person. I took a few deep breaths, and my hand that fell back was still gentle. "Wear skirts in the future and take off your glasses. Maybe then I'll look at you a few more times," the young master said mercifully. "I'm from the countryside. I'm already tacky. If you don't want to look at me, just close your eyes," I replied stubbornly. Eduardo opened his eyes. His black eyes were particularly clear in the mottled night, like a little beast. I raised my hand to gently touch his eyelids and helped him close his eyes. After a long while, he said sullenly, "Summer, you're so boring. I could never fall in love with you in my life." I smiled. "But I like you. No matter what you're like." These love words came out easily, already becoming a conditioned reflex. After all, when dealing with a depressed patient who often has thoughts of taking his own life, the most important thing is to let him know that no matter what he's like, there will always be someone in this world who loves him unconditionally. I've been playing this role for 4 years. Eduardo's mother, who was well maintained, was sitting on the sofa waiting for us to come back. She smiled at me gently. "Thank you for your hard work, Summer. Auntie, I'll go rest first." Eduardo's mother nodded and then turned to look at Eduardo, her expression changing. "Look at you. Hanging out with those people every day. How could your father trust you with the company?" Eduardo shrugged indifferently. "I didn't want to join the company in the first place. I'm only a freshman. There's still time after graduation. Could you have some sense of crisis? Do you want the illegitimate children outside to take away everything that belongs to you? Let them take it if they want." "I don't care." Eduardo's words were interrupted by a loud slap. "Eduardo, you've really disappointed me. Since you've almost recovered, starting from tomorrow, go to your father's company for an internship after school." Eduardo wanted to say something more. He moved his lips but finally said nothing and went upstairs angrily. I heard the door being opened, but I was so sleepy that I couldn't be bothered to open my eyes. The man got into bed and hugged me from behind. The clear and fresh scent unique to a young man instantly surrounded me. His arm was wrapped around my waist, strong and powerful. His cheek gently rubbed against my back like a helpless little cub seeking shelter. "Turn around." The voice that spoke was strong and domineering. I resigned myself to turning around to face him. He buried his face in my chest and finally closed his eyes quietly. Summer, you'll always love me, right? His voice was muffled. Yes, I replied drowsily. Do you want me to pat you? Without waiting for an answer, my right hand had already gently wrapped around his shoulder and was patting him gently. He hugged me even tighter. When I got up the next morning, the space beside me was already empty. This seemed to have become an unspoken habit between us. He would seek me out in the dark, but quietly leave before dawn. In the sunlight, he would turn back into that rebellious, sharp-tongued, and heartless Eduardo. And I was still that tacky Summer from the countryside. That brief moment of closeness seemed to be his shame that he never hugged me in the light. Recently, Eduardo has been much quieter as his mother has forced him to go to the company. I don't have to go to the bar in the middle of the night to pick him up anymore, and I'm quite happy to have some free time. One night, as I was walking back from school, suddenly a group of people covered my mouth and dragged me into a small alley. Fists rained down on me like a storm. They should have received instructions. They hit me all over my body except my face. Finally, someone grabbed my hair and made me look up. What I saw was the hot girl who had sat on Eduardo's lap that night. She was wearing high heels and kicked me hard in the lower abdomen. Those high and sharp heels. I broke out in a cold sweat from the pain. Do you know why we're hitting you? The hot girl asked. Because I'm Eduardo's fiancé? I asked. It seems you also know that this position doesn't suit you. A tacky bumpkin from the countryside, yet you still want to marry into a wealthy family? Go back to where you came from. Don't dirty the eyes of the Eduardo family. Okay, I replied simply. She wanted to say something more, but was stopped by my one-word answer. What did you say? She seemed incredulous at my straightforward answer. I said okay. I didn't want this fiancé position in the first place. I'll vacate it. If you're capable, go fight for it yourself. The girl was at a loss for words and hesitated for a long time before asking, Aren't you madly in love with Eduardo? I smiled lightly, Don't worry about it. Anyway, I'll give up this position. When I left, that group of people were still discussing whether I was out of my mind. Giving up the position that was within my reach and actually giving up the opportunity to reach for the sky in a single bound. After all, the Eduardo family is one of the top wealthy families in the Beijing social circle. But I've been burdened with the shackles of being Eduardo's fiancé for 4 years and am already exhausted. My parents died early. It was with the support of the Eduardo family that I was able to finish high school and enter university. Although I know that I'm just one insignificant student among hundreds of sponsored students. But without the support of the Eduardo family, my life would have been ruined long ago, so I'm grateful. After being admitted to a university in Beijing, I bought gifts and went to the Eduardo family to express my gratitude in person. Eduardo's mother didn't seem too welcoming of my arrival, and my gifts seemed rather meager in her eyes. She exchanged a few pleasantries with me, and I was just about to leave tactfully when a dull thud came from upstairs. That sound of a body hitting a hard object. I was very familiar with it. Eduardo's mother rushed upstairs eagerly, and I followed. The room was pitch dark, and Eduardo's mother pulled open the curtains. The sunlight shone down, and in front of the French window, a boy was sitting cross-legged on the floor. The bright morning sunlight fell on his jet-black shaggy hair, casting a shadow in front of his eyes. He had his back to us and didn't respond to the sound of people coming in. His back looked thin and lonely. He was looking out of the window blankly. I knew that he wasn't seeking the light. He hated the light. I was somehow drawn to walk over and sit beside him. So you're such a handsome boy. Seeing you makes my mood better. I knew my words wouldn't have much effect. But the boy's eyes turned slightly towards me. This tiny movement already made Eduardo's mother burst into tears of joy. She stood there, motioning for me to continue. But I didn't take any further action. I just sat on the floor beside him, from morning until evening, until the sun went down. My stomach growled inappropriately. He looked at my deflated belly and actually curled the corners of his mouth into a barely noticeable smile. Soon, a sumptuous Western meal was placed in front of us. I said in embarrassment, What should I do? Sister doesn't know how to use these tools. Silly. He slowly uttered this word and finally made the first move of the day. He cut the steak for me and handed the fork to me. I giggled and said, "Will you accompany Sister to eat? It's my first time eating this and Sister is so nervous." I speared a piece of steak and put it to his mouth. He quietly looked at me with those black, lifeless eyes. After a long time, my hand started to tremble. Just when I thought I was going to fail, he slowly opened his mouth. Eduardo's mother immediately covered her face and started crying. Later, I coaxed Eduardo to sleep. Eduardo's mother firmly refused to let me leave. She said that her son hadn't eaten or slept for 3 days. Since he was rescued from the suicide attempt, he hadn't had the slightest desire to live. She had tried every means and consulted many doctors but all in vain. She begged me to continue helping her son. That's how I stayed in the Eduardo family. I took care of Eduardo day and night, constantly telling him that I liked him and constantly using hugs to prove that someone loved him. Eduardo finally got better, but he still couldn't study or socialize normally. Eduardo's mother asked me to be Eduardo's fiancé and promised that when Eduardo turned 20, she would officially arrange our engagement for us. I said it wasn't necessary. Even to repay the Eduardo family for their financial support, I would do my best to take good care of Eduardo. However, Eduardo's mother was afraid that I would regret it and leave, so she wanted to tie me down with the title of fiancé. I just let her do as she wished. Eduardo didn't like me wearing plaid shirts. But plaid shirts were really practical. When I was in the countryside, it wasn't easy to notice if the plaid shirt got dirty. Tonight, the red and black plaid shirt covered the dirt on my body quite well. Even Eduardo's mother didn't notice anything unusual about me. I originally wanted to quietly go back to my bedroom, but she stopped me and said, "Summer, let's talk." Okay. I obediently sat down in front of her. "Summer, Eduardo will be 20 years old next month." After saying that, she quietly looked at me, waiting for my reaction. But I was in so much pain that just gritting my teeth to endure the pain took a lot of energy. At this moment, I really didn't have the spirit to guess what she meant. "Yeah," I replied politely. Since she couldn't get the reaction she wanted, she continued talking on her own. "Auntie once promised you that when Eduardo turned 20, we would arrange your engagement." At that time, I didn't even know if Eduardo could live to be 20 years old. She was on the verge of crying as she spoke. But I couldn't understand what she meant even more. So she had to continue. "Now, Eduardo has survived and is becoming more and more outstanding. More and more people have come to your uncle to propose marriage alliances, and they are all from prominent families in the capital city. So, Summer, you see, I finally understood. Tonight it seemed that everyone had coincidentally asked me to give up this position. Auntie, I never intended to be Eduardo's fiancé in the first place. Now that he has a better choice, I will voluntarily withdraw." Eduardo's mother held my hand and shed tears. "Summer, you're a sensible child. Without you, Auntie really doesn't know how to get through these 4 years. Don't worry, Auntie will definitely give you enough financial compensation." I gently brushed her hand away. "Auntie, I don't need financial compensation. Just consider that in these 4 years, I've repaid the Eduardo family for their financial support back then." Eduardo's mother was very satisfied with the result of tonight's conversation. She asked me to withdraw from the Eduardo family in a natural way and not have too much impact on Eduardo. I agreed. After all, Eduardo had disliked me for quite a long time. He should be happy when I leave. At night, a familiar body temperature pressed against my back. I frowned and complained, "Eduardo, you smell strongly of alcohol." He seemed very tired and his voice was sleepy. "Too tired. Don't want to take a bath." His slightly hoarse voice was unexpectedly charming, reminding people of the 16-year-old Eduardo. Although he didn't have the will to live at that time, he was so pure that it broke people's hearts. At that time, I was only 19 and had just started my freshman year in college. I was busy with my studies but still had to take care of him. He considerately said, "If you're really too tired, don't worry about me. I'll talk to my mother." Not tired at all. I forced a smile. He said, "Before you came, my mother had given up on me herself. Don't have any psychological burden." At that time, he was always afraid of being a trouble to others and could easily detect my slightest frown. "Darling," I stroked his face with both hands, "you're amazing. You're excellent in your studies, first class in horse riding, and you can also play a beautiful game of golf. You're an angel who has fallen to the earth, the most handsome and outstanding boy I've ever seen. I really like being with you." The boy's eyes suddenly lit up and he asked in disbelief, "Really?" I rubbed his face with my hands and looked at him seriously. "Really, sister likes you." He suddenly blushed and let his handsome and cold face be kneaded into various shapes by me. He even took the initiative to move closer, gently rubbing his cheek against my palm. How could such a cute and caring boy become so sharp-tongued and mean later? I was lost in thought when Eduardo's arm wrapped around my waist. He sighed wearily and his nose explored around my neck. The hot breath made my spine go stiff. However, he didn't seem to notice at all. His big hand moved to my flat abdomen and suddenly pushed me towards him with force. It hurt. I couldn't help but moan softly in pain. All of Eduardo's movements came to a halt. His chest heaved more violently, the air was so quiet that I could hear his rapid heartbeat. The hot air around my neck became even hotter. It seemed that I witnessed Eduardo's transformation from a boy to a man. One important sign was his breath. Before, his breathing was light, with the freshness of a young boy. Later, as his Adam's apple protruded, his breathing became much heavier, like a steaming little bellows, and it couldn't be ignored when it blew on people's faces. At this moment, his lips happened to move to the back of my ear, and the hot breath was filled with the smell of wine. He held my earlobe in his mouth and said in a hoarse voice, "Trying to seduce me?" I was so shocked by his words that I forgot to react. When I finally came to my senses, I swung my right arm backward mercilessly and said, "Seduce your ass." However, Eduardo grabbed my unruly arm and restrained my whole body. "Don't move," he ordered, "let me go. I'm uncomfortable." I struggled to escape from his arms. But Eduardo suddenly grabbed my waist and lifted me up. After the world spun around, I was lying on top of him, looking into his eyes, with his burning hot chest beneath me. Tears flowed from my eyes. "Eduardo, it hurts so much." Eduardo turned on the light. The man in front of me had the top 2 buttons of his black shirt undone, revealing his delicate and sexy collarbone. The hair that had been combed behind his ears was now falling in strands in front of his eyes. He stared at my body with a pair of gloomy eyes. Countless terrifying bruises, red and purple, were scattered all over my body. Especially the largest and darkest one on my snow-white belly, which was quite shocking. I felt uncomfortable being stared at like this. "Give me my clothes." Eduardo didn't move. There were turbulent emotions in his eyes, and his voice was fierce. "Who did this?" I forcibly pulled my outer garment back. "They're just flesh wounds. They'll heal soon." Eduardo suddenly roared like an enraged lion, "I'm asking you who did it." It was too dark. I didn't see clearly. I didn't dare to look into his angry eyes. I was afraid that in the next moment, his clenched fist would land on me. He angrily turned around and slammed the door shut. The sound of a car engine came from downstairs. I thought he wouldn't come back. But after a while, Eduardo came back carrying a big bag of medicine. "Take off your clothes." His voice was gloomy. I didn't dare to provoke him and obediently turned around, exposing my back. His hands were very unsteady, sometimes pressing hard and sometimes gently. "What are you trembling for?" I asked amusedly. "You're the one trembling." He gritted his teeth. But I seemed to hear a hint of a nasal sound in his deliberately fierce voice. "Kid, are you going to cry?" The last and only time I saw Eduardo cry was on his 18th birthday. At that time, Eduardo's mother asked me to be Eduardo's fiancé. I refused without hesitation. "Auntie, I'll take good care of him like he's my own younger brother. There's no need for the title of fiancé." When I slightly turned my head, Eduardo was standing at the corner of the corridor, looking at me with red eyes and a pitiful expression. Seeing that I was looking at him, he immediately ran away. I chased after him. However, The boy who had always been willing to share with me didn't say a word that time. Oh, that's when our relationship took a nosedive and became worse than that of ordinary people. He couldn't wait to say the most venomous sarcastic remarks to me. After being hurt many times, I became numb. Later, I reluctantly agreed to Eduardo's mother's plea and became Eduardo's so-called fiancé. But there was no emotion in his eyes, as if it wasn't him who was going to get engaged. Hey, Eduardo, sister hasn't seen you cry for almost 2 years. I teased. The hand applying the medicine on my back stopped and then pressed hard on my wound. I was in so much pain that I directly fell onto the bed. Eduardo, what are you doing? You deserve it, he said mercilessly. Then he threw the medicine bottle onto the bed. Apply it on the front by yourself. I clumsily applied the medicine. Eduardo stood behind me, slightly bending his right leg and leaning against the wall. The lighter in his hand was being lit and put out intermittently. When I turned around, the flame was flickering in front of him, making his handsome and charming face look bright and then dim, adding to his charm. This guy was really cool and handsome. Eduardo saw me looking at him and slightly raised his chin. Done? I nodded. He turned on the light and got into bed skillfully. There was silence in the darkness. When I thought he had already fallen asleep, he suddenly spoke without any reason. Summer, I'm not that bad, am I? I put my hand on his chest and asked gently, are you feeling down again? He was silent for a moment and then pushed my hand away, turning his back to me. Go to sleep. I don't know how I offended the young master again. In the following few nights, after helping me apply the medicine, he left and didn't sleep in my room anymore. That's good. He didn't need me that much anymore. Soon, it was his 20th birthday. The entire Eduardo family attached great importance to it. Eduardo was a favored son of heaven. Since he was 1 year old, his birthday parties had been grand every year. It's just that later, when his depression flared up, there were no more birthday parties. This year was the first time to hold a grand birthday party again after his condition improved. He had outstanding academic achievements and started to learn in his father's company. And he was just at the right age of 20. So the Eduardo family has been making preparations since 3 days ago. Eduardo's mother specially arranged a stylist for me. She greeted me with a smile, saying, it's time to doll up our summer properly. I took off my black-framed glasses and tied my hair into a bun, revealing my slender neck. A simple and elegant light blue dress with a straight neckline showed off my nice waistline. When I was walking downstairs while holding the railing, Eduardo happened to look up. Then his gaze froze. His long and narrow eyes narrowed slightly, and there was undisguised amazement and fascination in them. He turned his head slightly, with a smile on his lips, looking completely enchanted. I bumped his shoulder with mine and said, well? Am I charming? He lowered his head slightly and burst out laughing, brightly and heartily, just so. I've told you long ago that black-framed glasses don't suit you. Let's go, fiancé. He bent his arm, waiting for me to take it. I stared fixedly at his slightly raised eyebrows and eyes, feeling unusually good. Oh, he still thought that today's birthday banquet was our engagement banquet. Seeing that I didn't move, he said awkwardly, for the sake of how beautiful you are today, I'll reluctantly admit that you're my fiancé. I've prepared a gift for you. I'll show it to you later. He winked at me, just like twinkling stars, alas. I sighed and slowly took his arm. Finally, he smiled knowingly. Eduardo's father was giving a speech on the stage. I seldom saw him at home. It was said that the woman he kept outside was very good at coaxing people, and he was so indulged that he didn't want to come home. Later, that woman gave birth to a son for him. This put Eduardo's mother's position in jeopardy. So she spared no effort to give Eduardo an elite education, which made Eduardo fall under the pressure. Now that Eduardo has become his pride again, he was speaking with a big smile on his face. Today, besides being our son's 20th birthday, we also have an important thing to announce. Eduardo's father looked at me intentionally or unintentionally, and I nodded with a smile. Summer, this outstanding and kind-hearted girl, has accompanied our family through many difficulties over the years and has never left us. She is a lucky star for our Eduardo family. So we've decided. Eduardo straightened his chest, with a calm and indifferent smile on his face. But only I knew how nervous he was. The arm I was holding was stiff at the moment. He wrapped my small hand with his big hand, gripping so tightly that his knuckles turned white and his palm was sweating slightly. Eduardo's father paused for a moment and then continued, so we've decided to adopt Summer as our goddaughter. We'll treat her as our own daughter and will prepare a rich dowry for her in the future. As soon as the words were spoken, Eduardo looked at me in disbelief, shock written all over his eyes. Eduardo's father and mother had already taken out thick red envelopes and were looking at me with smiles. I pulled my hand out, walked forward calmly, and called out sweetly, "Godfather. Godmother." The two elders narrowed their eyes with smiles and handed the red envelopes to me. Someone asked in confusion, "Didn't they say that Summer was Eduardo's fiancée before? How did she become a goddaughter?" Eduardo's mother was graceful and poised. "What fiancé? It's just baseless rumors outside. How old is Eduardo to have a fiancé? The two of them have always called each other brother and sister. Eduardo, come and call her sister." Eduardo seemed to still not understand the current situation. His beautiful eyes were full of confusion, looking at me for a while and then at his parents. And we were all smiling, waiting for his response. He staggered a few steps and finally managed to stand firm. "Sister? Right, is sister." He looked at me coldly, his gaze as cold and sharp as a knife, trying to read something from my face. I looked back at him with a faint smile, looking calm and composed. Finally, he got nothing and left angrily, waving his hand. Eduardo's mother grabbed him and whispered in his ear, "Eduardo, don't think that only you can be desperate. If you dare to walk out today, just wait to collect my body." Eduardo's pupils trembled violently. After a long while, he turned his head with difficulty and said word by word, "Mother, Eduardo is really good at scheming." Today, in front of everyone, we were a loving family. Eduardo's father led us to walk around among the people and introduced his outstanding son and newly adopted daughter to everyone. People sent their congratulations one after another. Whether they were sincere or not, Eduardo's mother accepted them with a smile. Finally, we stopped in front of a middle-aged man with a kind face. I had been in the Eduardo family for 4 years and almost subconsciously judged that this man was the VIP of tonight. Sure enough, Eduardo's father shook hands with him very enthusiastically and exchanged greetings, and the other man pushed out a girl in a white dress from behind. "Look, white is the color reserved for princesses. This is my beloved daughter Dawn, who is also a freshman in college. Dawn, this is Eduardo that Dad often talks about to you. You should learn from Eduardo and stop playing all day long," Mr. Chu said affectionately. The girl named Dawn was so shy that she didn't even dare to look directly into Eduardo's eyes. She called out softly, "Brother Eduardo," and her face turned red. Both families burst out laughing. This matter was half done. If Eduardo hadn't always had a cold expression on his face, I would have reason to suspect that the marriage between these two could be settled today. I tried my best to lower my presence and followed behind. Suddenly, a tall and straight young man walked out from the other side's group. "Summer, is it really you?" The young man walked towards me in surprise. "Justin?" I was a bit surprised. I majored in psychology in college, while Justin majored in economics. But he took psychology as a minor in his junior year, so we had some classes together. I had talked to him a few times when collecting homework. I didn't expect to meet him here. Eduardo, who had been expressionless before, walked to my side in a few steps at this moment, half of his body blocking me, in a rather defensive posture, staring at Justin with a dark face. "Who is he?" "Hello, I'm Justin, Dawn's brother and Summer's classmate." Justin friendly extended his right hand. Eduardo gave him a cold look and then turned his head, ignoring Justin's friendly gesture. Justin rubbed the tip of his nose awkwardly, but he wasn't angry. "Summer, could you show me around your garden? I heard that Auntie has planted a large rose garden." Eduardo's mother nodded with a smile. "Go ahead. Remember to come back for cake later." Walking out of the banquet hall, there was always a gloomy gaze fixed on my back. I tugged at Justin's sleeve, signaling him to hurry up. He cooperated very well and held my wrist instead. Once out of the banquet hall, I quietly pulled my hand out. Justin looked at his empty palm, feeling a sense of loss, but then he smiled again. It's already a big step forward. What? I was puzzled. You didn't even look at me before, but today you let me hold your hand, so I said it's already a big step forward. My face darkened slightly. Is Mr. Chu always so familiar with girls? If it came to flirting with girls, could anyone compare with Eduardo? With his extremely handsome face, he lingered among many beautiful girls. I had seen him make a little girl blush with just a few words, and also seen him make a girl stare blankly with just a light touch on her nose. So Justin's attempt to strike up a conversation didn't make me feel shy or embarrassed at all. Instead, it made me extremely uncomfortable. I didn't like being so abruptly approached by a stranger. Seeing my reaction, Justin's expression showed obvious panic. Summer, don't misunderstand. I didn't mean to be disrespectful to you. I just don't know how to start a conversation with girls. You were always in a hurry at school. I summoned up the courage to say hello to you many times, but your cold eyes stopped me. So, although we had classes together for 2 years, I didn't get to say much to you. I'm really not the kind of person you dislike. The big boy in front of me was eager to prove himself, looking nervous. Where was the calmness and composure when we first met? I couldn't help but smile. I misunderstood you. Let's go. I'll take you to see the rose garden. Justin was a very polite boy. When I was talking, he would slightly bow his upper body and listen carefully with his side face. He used his hand to shield the flower branches above my head, with a smile on his lips. Summer, are you really not Eduardo's fiancée? I shook my head. Great. He smiled so much that the corners of his eyes were almost curved up. Huh? I looked at you in puzzlement. Justin's eye color was rather light, and he had much less aggressiveness. When he looked at people, his eyes were full of softness, and his voice was gentle and pleasant. Maybe you won't believe it when I say it. I decided to take psychology as a minor in my junior year actually to increase the chances of meeting you. But later they told me that you were Eduardo's fiancée. Although I was very reluctant, I could only give up. Now it's okay. You're just Eduardo's sister, and my dad wants to match my sister with Eduardo. So I can pursue you openly in the future. I have no intention of falling in love. I flatly refused. Justin wanted to say something more, but I coldly interrupted him. Let's go back. It's time to cut the cake. Justin's eyes were filled with a deep sense of loss, and the corners of his beautiful eyes drooped. When we returned to the banquet hall, the waiters were pushing a beautiful cake cart in. The 5-layer big cake was decorated with fresh roses, making people feel happy in their hearts. When the cake cart passed by me, I couldn't yet help leaning forward, wanting to take a better look. Suddenly, someone pushed me hard from behind. I fell towards the cake cart without any defense. The huge cake collapsed on the ground, and I fell on it, with cream all over my face and body. Screams rang out around, and people scattered in all directions, afraid of getting splashed. I tried to get up, but my feet slipped, and instead, I fell back embarrassingly, making the cream on my face look even more ridiculous. It was really embarrassing. I looked up helplessly and happened to meet Eduardo's eyes. There was undisguised nervousness in his eyes. He was about to take a step towards me when Eduardo's mother grabbed him. Eduardo's mother looked at me, with deep dissatisfaction and warning in her eyes. I had messed up the birthday banquet, and she was very angry. She didn't want her son to make a fool of himself with me. A bitter smile appeared at the corner of my mouth, and I tried to get up again. A figure crouched down in front of me. Justin asked with concern, "Can you stand up?" I smiled and said, "It seems not." "Excuse me." He stretched out his arm and picked me up princess style. "I've got your clothes dirty," I said uneasily. He looked at me with his gentle eyes. "You don't seem like the kind of person who cares about such details." I wiped the cream on my face. "We should be polite anyway, right? My bedroom is on the 2nd floor. So, under the gaze of dozens of pairs of eyes, Justin fished me out of the cake mess and then, in the sight of everyone, carried me upstairs. I went into the bathroom to take a shower. When I came out, he had already taken off his suit jacket, revealing the white shirt inside. However, there was still cream on his trousers and collar. "I'll go and get you a set of Eduardo's clothes," I said, and was about to turn around and go out. Justin grabbed my hand and pulled me back in front of him, his eyes filled with deep affection. "I'm so happy today that it's me standing beside you." I couldn't help laughing. Is this something to be proud of? Although I hadn't had much contact with Justin, he was really a warm-hearted man. He would respect my decisions and carefully protect my self-esteem. Being his girlfriend would mean being spoiled rotten, right? "What are you doing?" When Eduardo pushed the door open, what he saw was Justin and I holding hands. I unconsciously tried to pull my hand back, but this time Justin held it tightly. He was no longer as modest and magnanimous as when he was first hostilely treated by Eduardo. Although his expression was still warm and harmless, his words were powerful. "Can't you see that we're holding hands as lovers?" "Let her go." Eduardo's face darkened and his voice was cold and stern. "No, I just managed to hold her hand. Why should I let it go?" Justin looked down at me. The deep affection in his eyes made me dare not look directly at him, and I blushed and lowered my head. "I told you to let her go." Eduardo roared ferociously and at the same time punched Justin in the face. This time, Justin didn't hold back and fought back vigorously. The two of them got into a scuffle, and no one could persuade them to stop. It seemed that Justin had long been harboring dissatisfaction in his heart, and now he said it without any scruples. "Eduardo, who do you think you are? Even if she weren't your sister but a stranger and she fell into a pile of cakes, you should have pulled her out. What right do you have to order me around now?" Eduardo seemed to have been hit at his weak point. He slowly lowered his fists, gave up resistance, and let Justin punch and kick him. Finally, Eduardo's mother rushed over and shouted anxiously, "Oh my! I asked you to come upstairs to deliver some clothes. Why did you end up fighting? Summer, is it because of you? As an older sister, you not only ruined your younger brother's birthday party today but also got him beaten up. Why didn't I see that you were so calculating?" Justin stopped what he was doing and looked at her with his chest heaving violently, his eyes full of contempt and disdain. Eduardo struggled to turn his bruised and swollen face and looked at his mother, speaking in disbelief. "Mom, didn't you see? She was pushed onto the cake. Why are you blaming her? She has given 4 years to our family. Just now, you didn't even let me go forward to help her because you were afraid of losing face. Our Eduardo family sponsored her 3,600 yuan, and she has already paid it back long ago. Our nanny's monthly salary is more than 10,000 yuan. Just because she has no parents, are we going to take advantage of her like this?" I bit my lip tightly to stop myself from crying out. In the Eduardo family over the years, no matter how aggrieved I was, I never let myself cry out loud, because then I would be accused of being overly sentimental and Eduardo would scold me for being troublesome. But at this moment, tears kept falling like beads with a broken string, and I couldn't wipe them away. Justin hugged me into his arms and patted me carefully. "If you're aggrieved, just cry it out." Soon, my tears wet his shirt, and his warm body temperature passed through the wet fabric to my cheeks. His big hand gently stroked the top of my head, and the thick palm gradually calmed my mood down. That day, I moved out of the Eduardo family's house and rented a small apartment outside. Sometimes Justin would come to see me, but I told him not to come anymore. Although I did feel the long-lost warmth from him that day, I asked myself that I couldn't return the same amount of affection to him. So it would be a good thing for him to give up earlier and cut his losses in time. However, he still sent me all kinds of gifts regularly and also brought me some gossip. His father terminated the cooperation with the Eduardo family because he doubted the character of the Eduardo family and didn't allow Dawn to continue to have contact with Eduardo either. Dawn defied the opposition of the Eduardo family and secretly went to see Eduardo. Eduardo told her that he already had someone in his heart and couldn't accept anyone else anymore. After the recent turmoil, even the superficial peace between Eduardo's mother and father couldn't be maintained anymore, and they agreed to get a divorce. Eduardo moved out of the Eduardo family's ancestral house and lived outside by himself. When I heard news about the Eduardo family again, I didn't feel anything in my heart. At night, I stood behind the curtain. Eduardo was wandering around the big tree downstairs again, with cigarette butts piling up at his feet. He always came but never knocked on my door. As if sensing something, he looked up at my window. There was nothing to be seen in the dark window, so he lowered his head and continued smoking. One night, when I came back from school, he was waiting for me downstairs. "I'll take you to a place." "I don't want to go." "You must go," he said firmly and dragged me into the car without allowing any refusal. He took me to an abandoned warehouse. Under the dim yellow light, Eduardo's underlings were pressing a girl to kneel on the ground. Oh, it was the hot girl who had sat on Eduardo's lap before and had someone beat me up. At this moment, there was a rag stuffed in her mouth. When she looked at me, her face was full of jealousy and hatred. If she hadn't been pinned down, she would probably have pounced on me in the next second. Eduardo said, "She was the one who pushed you onto the cake. She had someone beat you up before and then I had someone beat her up. She blamed you for it." "I'm sorry." I pulled the rag out of the girl's mouth and gently wiped the blood clot at the corner of her mouth. But she spat and said, "Summer, stop pretending. I thought you were such a noble person. You clearly said you didn't care about being Eduardo's fiancée, yet you had him beat me up. You hide behind and pretend to be pure. You're a two-faced bitch." Before I could say anything, Eduardo kicked her hard in the chest and knocked her to the ground. "I've told you many times that it was me who beat you. It has nothing to do with her. Eduardo, you must have been instigated by her to beat me. That night, you were so gentle with me. How could you beat me?" The girl's face was filthy and she was crying bitterly. "Wake up. If I hadn't known that Summer was coming to see me soon, would I have let you get close to me and act out that cheesy affectionate scene with you?" Eduardo hit back mercilessly. The girl couldn't believe what Eduardo said. She was laughing and crying, crouching on the ground and trembling. After a long while she laughed maliciously. "Ha ha ha, I thought I was the only one who was so blindly infatuated. Unexpectedly, the high and mighty Eduardo is even more so. You deliberately let me approach you, wanting Summer to be jealous? But do you know? That night when I told her to leave you, she agreed so readily. She said she didn't care about the title of Eduardo's fiancé at all. She doesn't like you at all. Not at all. Ha ha ha." Eduardo's eyes turned red like a madman who had lost his reason and he kept kicking the girl while shouting, "Shut up. Shut up. I told you to shut up." If the others hadn't stopped him, something terrible might have happened. "Eduardo, stop it," I called to him. Eduardo punched the concrete floor and blood oozed out. He seemed unaware of the pain and just looked at me with his bloodshot eyes. "Summer, you can't leave me." His voice was shrill and mournful. I sighed. "I've already applied for an overseas exchange opportunity and will leave at the beginning of next month. When I'm not around, you should learn to take care of yourself. Don't fight and make trouble every day. If I say that if you dare to leave, I'll jump off the 88th floor, will you stay for me?" Eduardo looked at me obsessively. "Eduardo, it's easier to die than to live. But only by living can there be hope. Let me tell you my story. Before I was 16 I still had a complete family. Although we were poor it was full of love. That summer, because there was too much rain, the reservoir upstream released floodwaters and many big fish were washed into the river. My mother was greedy and asked my father to go and catch some. My father was swept away by the mountain torrent and his body was never found. My mother thought that she had killed my father and became depressed ever since. She kept sinking into depression, self-harmed, and finally jumped into that river too. Since then I became the head of the household on the household register. I had no one to rely on in this world anymore. Originally I had planned to go to work after finishing the third year of junior high school. After all, I even had problems with having enough to eat, let alone having money for high school. Fortunately, the Eduardo family provided scholarships in our county that year and I walked out of that small mountain village relying on the scholarships. So I've been very grateful to the Eduardo family all my life. No matter how much harm it brought to me later, the help it gave me can't be ignored. Eduardo, when you were 16 you thought life was meaningless, so you chose to commit suicide. But when I was 16, just wanting to survive was a luxury for me. I didn't even know how to solve my 3 meals for the next day. Do you know why I studied psychology? Because I had to save myself. After my mother passed away, I seemed to lose my ability to empathize and couldn't respond to the joys and sorrows of the outside world. But there was a belief that supported me and made me continue to survive in this indifference. I've already pulled you out of the abyss once. If you want to go back to the abyss, I can only deeply regret it. After all, you have the right to decide your own life. Eduardo covered his face and cried, his shoulders trembling, and his voice was also trembling and choked. I won't die. I just want to keep you. Summer, I like you. Please stay, okay? Looking at the young man I had taken care of, I couldn't bear it in my heart either, but I still stood up resolutely. Eduardo, learn how to love again. Even if it's in the name of liking or loving. The harm you've inflicted on me is no different from that of Eduardo's mother. Trampling on self-esteem, insulting and hurting others are not ways of loving. I didn't expect that Eduardo's mother would come when I was waiting at the airport. I made some rose flower cakes. It's my first time making them. I don't know if they taste good. She showed a humble smile for the first time. I smiled and took them. Thank you, Auntie. She sat down beside me. We watched the planes outside the glass wall take off one by one, and neither of us knew how to start a conversation. Finally, she broke the silence first. No matter how many apologies I make, they can't make up for the harm I've caused you. I'm not a qualified mother, and I'm not even a good person. Eduardo's father's affair made me become extreme. I wanted to do everything perfectly. I wanted Eduardo to be the best, but I ended up driving him sick. I wanted him to have the most enviable marriage, so I forcibly separated you two. Now my husband divorced me and my son turned against me. I have nothing left to fight for, but instead I feel relieved. She smiled bitterly and I smiled along with her. Auntie also wants to tell you a selfish thing. Yes, please go ahead. I looked at her with a faint smile. When Eduardo was 18, I wanted you two to get engaged. At that time I really hoped that you could marry him. I found out from his diary that he had developed romantic feelings for you. I thought that maybe love could heal him and make him recover faster. So I selfishly asked you to get engaged. That day when you refused me, Eduardo was deeply hurt. I didn't teach him how to express love and strive for love, so he chose extreme ways to treat you later, and I didn't stop him in time either. Summer, you've already taught him to live a good life. Auntie, can I ask you to teach him how to love properly again? Eduardo's mother looked at me hopefully. I stood up under her gaze and said apologetically, Sorry, Auntie. I need to board the plane now. When the plane passed through the thick clouds, I looked down at the city where I had stayed for 4 years and suddenly felt that it was like a dear old friend. I leaned on the porthole and whispered a little secret to this old friend. When I agreed to the engagement back then, I was also moved.